Hi, everyone. It's Kelly from The Hub. I'm here today with Matt, who is with Compass Mark, and he's going to be talking to us about the disease model for addiction. So this is one of those things that I think we all think we know what that is, but I really think we don't. So
Mm.
this will be a
Sure.
great opportunity. Matt,
Yeah.
how are you?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing really well. So
Wonderful.
I think we know this, but tell us why we really need to learn more.
Yeah, I think that people who at least adhere to the notion that addiction is a disease think that they can just kind of understand it that it's a disease, so it's kind of this thing that we need to be careful of, but we aren't fully aware of what that really means and what the indicators are, and understand that it's a progression. You don't wake up one day and start using substances and then the next day you are addicted, or you're in full-blown addiction. So
Right,
I
because
think
it's just like any other disease. You don't
Mhm.
wake up and just have stage 4 cancer. It's a
Right.
progression as things sort of go along. Good. Excellent.
Exactly. So um, this is a lesson. When we last talked, we went through a lesson that I do in my Skills for Life program. We also had this discussion in that program as well. And the way that I present it in that program is kind of this metaphor of road to addiction. So think of a road on a slight decline. Um, if you were on a road in a car on a slight decline, it would start off slowly, kind of rolling along, and as you kind of build up speed towards the end, it kind of gets a lot quicker, right?
Yeah, of course.
And so um, I think first, let's kind of start off um, to understand the disease model. There are 4 stages. The first stage is trial or experimental. So that would be someone just trying something out for the first time, and maybe they don't do it again. And they're like, oh, I tried it. I was curious, and no, I'm not going to do it anymore. In the program that I teach this in, we don't focus so much on that particular stage, because what we know for people who are at a higher risk, because they've already received consequences due to their use, they've already progressed into a later stage. So whether it be the second stage, which is the use stage, or the third stage, which is the abuse stage. And then finally, the fourth stage is obviously addiction.
So so there is abuse, and that's not necessarily addiction, and then that's a whole separate stage.
Right,
Oh,
right,
that's very
exactly,
helpful to know. Good.
exactly. Yeah. So some characteristics in the use stage to be aware of is that the use is very occasional. It's not happening on a regular basis. Might be once a month, maybe once every other month. Might be you go to a party strictly just to socialize with your friends. And you may make the choice to use, or you may make the choice not to use. And this person's kind of mentality is, I can take it or leave it. I don't have to have it. They feel as though they are in control of their own use. In the use stage, it's also very social, because we are using amongst other people. We don't start off using substances by ourselves typically. I'm sure there are people who have, but the majority of people who start off on this road do not start using by themselves.
Like, I have a friend who, when we're together before all of this stuff, if we were together at a bar, she would smoke a cigarette.
Hmm.
She doesn't smoke cigarettes in her regular life, but for her,
Mm,
that's a social thing. So she does
okay.
it when we're all together.
Right.
So she would be considered in this category a user.
Sure. Sure. I
But
would
it's
I would
social.
certainly consider that.
She only does it with us.
Hmm.
It's infrequent. She
Hmm.
doesn't do it outside of that situation.
Right.
Okay. All right, I
Right.
get that.
Yeah. Um, Also in the use stage, as you're first starting out, obviously you have a low tolerance. So that means you're not having to use as much to get that desired effect. Also, to be something to be aware of, though, if addiction does run in the family, if you have that genetic predisposition to addiction, starting off, um, you inherently have a higher tolerance than somebody who does not have that genetic predisposition.
Hmm.
Which is really interesting because that can actually be a catalyst for um, the progression further down the road, because you first start out and you're maybe using as much as people who have more experience than you do, and you kind of hold this as like a badge of honor, or like you can hold your own, or whatever it might be. So to you it's not a problem because it doesn't affect you like it does your friends who started using the same time as you, but they're getting wasted like immediately, and you're like, oh, I'm fine. You know what I
Huh.
mean?
So that's about your genetic predisposition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Huh. That's
yeah,
interesting too. I didn't know that. Hmm.
yeah. Um, Also, it's in the use stage. It's very recreational. You're just using to have a good time. Um, you kind of think of it like the typical high school student just looking to just enjoy themselves at a party, and it's what high school kids do, quote unquote.
Right, right.
But what we know is that it's not 100% true. Not all high school students use drugs and alcohol, of course, but that's kind of the notion that a lot of people have, that's just the rite of passage type mentality. So it's very recreational, very recreational. And also, you're not using to fully get the full effect because you're not totally aware of what the effects are going to be. So you are kind of easing your way into it, getting a little bit of a buzz the first few times, because you don't want to kind of overdo it. Of course, thinking back to our last conversation about risk and protective factors, for individuals who maybe have their scale tips in the favor of risk factors more than protective factors, maybe they are someone who starts off in full blown, let's get as drunk as we can, let's get as high as we can because of whatever is going on in their life, whatever risk factors they have going on in their life.
Hmm.
So that would mean that they kind of almost skip right over the use stage and right into the abuse stage.
Oh, okay. Right. Like you can you could spend as much or as little time in each stage depending on how you're progressing down that little incline on the road.
Yeah,
And
yeah, exactly.
and you can get off that road as you wish as well.
Um,
Depending.
yes,
Depending. Yeah.
depending.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay,
I will
good.
get to, if I forget that point, bring me back to that because I will touch on that
Okay.
in a
Good.
bit. Um, but yeah, to your point, there really is no set timetable for what time frame someone's in one stage versus another, or what the time frame from stage to stage really looks like.
And you could
Um,
stay in one stage and not necessarily
exactly,
progress into another. Right.
exactly. But what we do know is that, especially for young people, progressing from use to abuse is happening much more rapidly today than it did 15 years ago.
Huh.
Um, and the reason for that is, well, I was going to give you some answers. Do you have any guesses or ideas as why the progression is happening much more rapidly, or why we're identifying that to be true? Not to put you on the spot.
No, it's fine. I love trying to think of those kinds of things. I think that, well, I hope it's not fashionable, but that could
Mm,
definitely be it.
yeah.
Um, I think that I know that especially some drugs are cheaper than they used to be. They're more readily accessible than they used to be. So that means it's easier to get. So that means it's easier to use. So that's easy
Yeah.
means it's sort of that sort of slippery slope there.
Yeah. Right.
I, I'm not sure what other reasons why I mean, life is hard, but I mean, we have all walked down that path and say, oh, it's so much easier now than when I was a kid. So I don't
Right,
want to be, I don't want to go down that path about it. So I'm
right.
not sure what else could be reasons that that kids are going down that path and staying or going from use to abuse more.
Yeah, yeah. So some of the answers you just gave were right on.
Mm,
Accessibility inherently means more use. If something's more accessible and available to somebody, it's going to create an increase in use. That's statistics and studies have shown that to be true over the years.
and
Um,
that's whether or not it's chips
mhm,
or carrots or heroin. I mean, I don't want to be, just
yeah,
listen. It's not just about drugs. If it's easy to get
yeah,
McDonald's every day, you're going to get
yeah,
McDonald's. If
right.
it's easier to make food for yourself that's healthy, you're going to do that. So it's
Hmm.
more than just drug. That's an economic principle,
That's
right?
a really good point. That's a really
Yeah,
good point.
yeah.
Yeah. Another reason is the potency of drugs now
Yeah.
are exponentially higher than what they were several years ago.
Not.
Um,
I've been told not your grandmother's marijuana.
Not your grandmother's marijuana for sure. Um, think back to like Woodstock weed in the 60s. It was maybe like 5% THC. The marijuana being purchased now is pushing like 17, 20%. And then you also have the concentrates, wax, oils, shatter, which is um, highly concentrated THC, which is between 90 and 100% THC. And so that is creating this exponential high for somebody who uses that, and then they're needing to kind of use more and more and more to get that desired effect because they've already experienced this increasingly high.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, Also popularity in mixing substances. Just as an example, alcohol and stimulants like energy drinks and caffeine um, really kind of plays a role in increasing the risk for progressing from stage to stage because it's just creating this need for that effect. So you're again needing to use more and more as tolerance builds. Your progression kind of ensues.
Right. And it doesn't help that teens see people they like who are celebrities who are
Mhm.
doing those things. I mean, that has always been the case, but
Right.
when you party like a rock star, the
Sure.
alcohol drink, people know what that means, and
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
that matters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Media portrayal, of course, is a huge influence on young people, and really the perception of harm, in particular with marijuana, is at an all-time low. Kids don't think that it's harmful. Adults don't think it's harmful, and the reason that adults don't think it's harmful is because they're thinking of their grandmother's weed, because they're thinking of maybe their own experiences and, oh, it's just a little bit of weed, it's not that big a deal, it doesn't do anything, maybe it gives you the munchies, but it's not a big deal. But what we're really seeing now with the um, high concentration of THC in marijuana now, it's leading to marijuana-induced psychosis a lot more rapidly um, than before.
Wow.
So it's definitely something that is concerning and should be something that people are aware of, that just because it's legal in some states and just because it's um, prescribed medically in a lot of states does not mean that it's safe and okay for anyone to use.
Interesting.
Um, so speaking of abuse, what differentiates use from abuse is anytime use creates a consequence, it's become abuse.
Oh,
So
okay.
so consequence could be your tolerance is now increased. So now you have a higher tolerance in the abuse stage. So now you're needing to use more and more to get that desired effect.
So
Um,
consequence doesn't have to mean like in trouble with the law or in trouble
right.
with your parents. There's lots of kinds of consequences. Needing
Exactly.
more is a consequence.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay.
Exactly. And using more regularly is a consequence.
Okay.
So in the use stage, it was very occasional, very sporadic, but now the use has become regular. And it's not to say that it's necessarily every day, but regular use could just mean that there is a regular kind of schedule for which you use. So maybe you're someone who just drinks every weekend. Every Friday and Saturday night, I'm going out, or I'm getting together with friends, and I'm drinking, I'm getting drunk. That is regular use because it's on a regular occurrence.
Right.
Um, Now, because you have a higher tolerance, now because you have more experience using that, the desired effect is to get drunk or to get wasted or to get high. And that is what the intentions are every time a person uses in the abuse stage. Um, Whereas in the use stage, you felt like you were in control. Now you're losing more and more control because maybe you're going to, initially, you were going to parties to have fun and socialize and be recreational with your friends. But now the intent to go, when you go to these parties, is to use drugs and alcohol.
Right.
It's not just to have fun and enjoy your friends' company. It's, I know what I'm going to do when I get to that party, and that's what I'm most looking forward to.
Hmm.
Um, Also, preoccupation starts to set in. If you're someone who does drink every weekend, and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you're thinking about the next time you're going to have a drink, that is an indicator that you are maybe not have a dependence, but definitely have a preoccupation, and something is setting in that is creating this compulsion to think about and to use that particular substance.
Hmm. Hmm.
A coping mechanism actually sets in shortly before the abuse stage, which really drives the rest of the progression down this road. And that coping mechanism is denial. Denial allows that individual to kind of minimize their use to other people. If somebody expresses concern for how often they're using or how much they're using or what they're using and all that kind of stuff, they might just minimize. Oh, I don't use as much as you're saying I'm using. I don't drink as much as you say I am. Yeah, I smoke weed every day, but at least I'm not doing heroin. Those types of
Oh.
minimizations and rationalizations kind of set in this denial. And if you think of denial as an acronym, it could stand for don't even notice I always lie. Don't even notice I am lying. And
Huh.
again, denial allows for the individual not only to lie to themselves and to avoid the facts, but also allows them to manipulate and lie to other people to um, again, to minimize the concerns that other people might start to have for them.
Yeah, and I think that, the one that you said of, well, at least I'm not doing heroin, or
Hmm.
at least I'm not, there's always something that you could be doing that's worse. And I think that's so dangerous to start to travel down that path, because you're
Right.
truly saying to somebody else, well, you're right, but
Yeah. Right.
right, I mean, you're totally confirming that you are doing that behavior.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Um, and I think that, and I touched on the consequences as far as what consequences look like from stage to stage, but also those legal and social consequences can happen anywhere along the road. Um, it could be your very first time trying something out, and party gets busted, and now you have underage or possession or something like that, right?
Right,
Um,
right. Just be right. And we
mhm,
talked about spending time at each stage and how right. You could go from use to consequences in a second.
mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Hmm, hmm.
yeah. And but of course, the further down the road you get, the more compound the consequences get. Typically, the more severe the consequences get. And just to list some consequences that somebody might experience, might be loss of trust with family and friends, might be loss of money because they're spending their money on the substances, or they're spending money on fines and costs because of a legal consequence. Might lose a driver's license, might lose a car, might lose um, responsibilities because they're not able to now get to their job, or they might lose a job, might get kicked out of school. So there are many consequences that happen anywhere along this road. Um, so I think that's just really important to know that just because I feel like I'm in control and I can handle myself early on does not exclude you from experiencing a consequence that could ultimately affect your future. Um, so I think that's important to just to kind of put out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the way that I explain those consequences when we discuss it in this program, in this lesson, is they're kind of like invisible trapdoors along the road. The friends who you started out using with, who are telling you about all the great things that happen um, when you go to parties and engage in these behaviors and things like that, they did not inform you of these invisible trapdoors, or in Pennsylvania, you could also consider them to be potholes. Um, and
Right.
yeah.
And like they could be little tiny potholes or they could be
Hmm.
big giant suck your car in potholes.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
For sure. Yep. um, and one thing I haven't mentioned yet, as far as why young people tend to start off on this road, why the onset of use is typically at a young age, is because inherently as humans, we are risk takers. We lack that connection between our logical part of our brain and our emotional impulsive part of our brain.
Thus
And
bungee jumping.
exactly, exactly. And the analogy that I use is, if I were waiting for my participants in my group to arrive, and I had a jetpack. I knew how to turn it on. It was a brand new jetpack. I knew how to turn it on, but I had no idea how to operate, how to fly it, how to maneuver, how to adjust the speed, how to land, if it would land. Um, how many of them would be willing to take the jetpack for a fly?
All of them.
Inevitably, at least half,
Yeah.
um, typically more than half.
Right. Yeah.
And like, that sounds awesome. Let me take that jetpack for a fly.
Right. Even if you right, knowing it is just a jetpack. That's it. That's
Mhm.
all you
Yeah,
know. Yeah.
yeah, yep. For those who did not raise their hand, I then posed the question: if those who did take the jetpack for a fly um, came back, landed safely, showed you exactly how to fly it, how to maneuver, how to adjust the speed, how to adjust the height so you didn't go too high if heights was an issue for you, how many of you would then be more willing to take it for a fly? And typically the rest of the hands go up
Yeah.
because there's no perceived harm. So that's kind of how this progression starts off. If an individual, again, who has higher, more risk factors than protective factors, um, goes in like, yeah, that sounds great, sign me up, and they start using. But then someone who maybe has more protective factors, they're going to maybe go to a party or two and kind of observe, socialize with their friends, and observe other people who are engaging in those behaviors. And if the party doesn't get busted, nobody vomits all over themselves, no fights break out, parents don't find out, um, the next party that they go to, they might be more inclined to use because there was no perceived consequences, no perceived harm that came from their friend's use.
Right.
And that's, I think that the jetpack analogy is a really good example for that.
Absolutely.
Um, so then finally, of course, the last stage is addiction. Now tolerance is kind of through the roof. In the use stage, you're kind of using to feel buzzed. In the abuse stage, you were comfortable with it, so now you're using to get that desired effect on a regular basis. In the addiction stage, you're really using just to feel normal. An individual no longer really feels that full effect. They're just using to not feel the withdrawal. They're using to not feel the pain, and they're just using to feel normal at that point.
Hmm.
Um,
Which I think that people who aren't really sort of well versed in this, including myself,
mhm,
we all think that people who are in the addiction stage are using to get high all the time.
mhm.
But I it's interesting to say that they're using to feel okay.
Right,
That's
right,
interesting. That's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. So um, it's important to understand that addiction is an equal opportunity destroyer. It doesn't just affect one person over another. It doesn't affect one gender over another, uh, one race, one ethnicity, one socioeconomic status. Um, it affects everyone in a similar way. But what we do know is that just because you start off on this road does not mean that addiction is the end game. And I'm glad I remembered to circle back to this point, because as you mentioned before, you can get off this road at any point, but it's not just as easy as saying, "Oh, I'm done," especially if you've progressed further down the road. Um, think of think of this road like an undertow. Say you were at the beach and there's a sign in the sand, or a lifeguard on duty said, "No entering the water today." There's an undertow. What that means is there's a current underneath the surface of the water that has the power to pull you out offshore. It's kind of like a funnel type uh, shape, I guess. And the only way to get out, if you were to ignore those warnings, like a lot of us do, we ignore the warnings when we're young. Don't do drugs and alcohol. Drugs and alcohol are bad, and all that kind of stuff. But we ignored those warnings, and we entered this road anyway. We thought we knew better. We're invincible. We're risk takers, and so we are out there enjoying ourselves, splashing around the waves with our friends. And before we know, we look back, and we didn't feel that pull that undercurrent was having on us, and now we're offshore 50 yards, 100 yards, um, and you can't swim straight back to shore because you're just going to continue to get sucked out.
Right.
You need to swim diagonally or swim sideways, right?
And that
And
and that feels counterintuitive when you're doing it,
mhm, yeah, right,
which is what
uh,
this process is like too. You're like,
exactly,
now I can't just stop. I can't get off the path. I can't just go how I want to go. I got to do something more, something extra in order to be able to be safe.
right, right. And so you're going to have to do more than just stop, especially if you are someone who has progressed into the addiction stage. You can't just stop. There's going to need to be changes to your daily life, to your daily routine, to your environment, to the people who you're spending your time with. Um, uh, uh, Lessons in rehab constantly talk about changing people, places, and things, right? And so it's important that an individual knows that it's not just going to be as easy as making a quick decision. It's going to take work, but it's going to be worth it, and it is doable. People can and do change all the time, and there is absolutely hope. I think that when someone has progressed into addiction, they feel a sense of hopelessness, but I think it's important to understand that there is always hope, and that if you can seek the appropriate form of treatment, rehab is not necessarily the end all be all form of treatment. Some people benefit from counseling. Some people benefit from um, partial hospitalization, or um, what support groups and things like that. So there are many ways to go about making changes in your life, and seeking the most appropriate form for yourself is really important. Understanding that there's not a one size fits all for everybody. It's important that we treat this disease on an individual basis. It's not just like, oh, you have addiction, so you do this. It doesn't work that way. It's, you have addiction. What is the substance? What are some underlying factors? And let's treat this in a holistic way and on an individualistic basis, not just a one size fits all diagnosis or prescription.
Right. This has been fascinating, Matt. I have to say, I learned a lot, and just walking through those 4 stages is really enlightening. It really gives you a good model about what to avoid, what to be thoughtful about, how you can help somebody else. This is what this looks like. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, and again, this is not to help someone shame or judge somebody,
Of course.
but really to provide someone with the opportunity to speak up and enlighten somebody if they are in denial, and really don't just stand by and by not speaking, I'm not saying something. Essentially what's happening is you're enabling them, because you're not speaking up and letting them know that you had these concerns. If you have legitimate concerns, say something to somebody or to that person, and let them know, because if we let it go, addiction is, again, it's primary, so it's not a result of something else, right? It is progressive, which we just talked about the progression, and it can be fatal if left untreated. So it's important to understand that if you don't say something and you don't help somebody, or if you don't advocate for yourself, it could be setting yourself up or setting somebody else up for some serious consequences, and it's not fair to anybody. So it's important to say something and recognize the signs as they're occurring.
Wonderful. Matt, thank you so much. This has been really helpful.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
We will talk again.
All
Thank
right,
you.
perfect.
See you,
All right.
everybody.